Hello, my name is Rebecca Riker, and I'm the Executive Director of Icicle Creek Center for the Arts. Welcome to the Bright Light Art Education Series. This is the first of our online educational classes featuring a faculty of talented local artists. We're so glad you're here. This is a wonderful opportunity to come together while we're apart. These educational opportunities are brought to you as part of our summer celebration and fundraising campaign, Light the Path. 2020 is a milestone year as we celebrate 25 years of excellence in art education and performance. This 3-week content-rich class and the ones that will follow mark the beginning of our summer-long celebration. If you like this and love Icicle Creek, please partner with us to reach our goal of $75,000 to light the path and help replace the fundraising events that had to be canceled. Please go to our website, icicle.org, to make your gift and learn more about our Spotlight Classical Concert Series and the Starlight live-streamed concerts featuring the local bands you know and love. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Rhia Foster, and I look forward to seeing you soon in one of our upcoming virtual events.
Hey everyone, I'm Rhia Foster and I'm really excited to be here today. Thank you for joining me. We're going to talk about a couple of things over the next few weeks that are really near and dear to my heart. I do teach jazz history at Wenatchee Valley College, which is a really exciting topic for me, so I'm really happy that I get to share a little bit of that passion with you. First and foremost, I chose music as conversation to share with you. And there are a couple of reasons that this has been on my mind, even more than normal in the last several months, right? Our world today, our nation today, is really desperately seeking out the arts. We are particularly looking for music. We're watching and hoping that our favorite artists come out with things online and join us in our homes so we can have live concerts, virtual concerts from everywhere. We're missing that connection between ourselves and our church choirs and our community choirs and our community bands and our high school bands and all these kinds of experiences where we're sharing the love of music and playing music together. I do think it's interesting because the struggle is one of distance, right? Physical distance between us. But currently, especially in the last few weeks, it's become even bigger, right? It's not just physical distance right now. It's distance that's caused by lack of unity in the nation. And that's something that I'd kind of like to explore as well. I initially picked this topic weeks ago, thinking about why there have been so many cravings for music and musical activities. We have been we've been run through the gamut of the stages of lockdown and reopening with this pandemic, with the COVID-19 crisis. As a teacher of jazz history, of Black history, I'm seeing even more significance in this topic in the last couple of weeks. And I want to just sort of assure you that even though history is sort of taking this turn and we're watching our nation kind of struggle with inequality and racism like we are, but this has affected my lecture, but it actually hasn't changed my lecture. This is a topic that is pretty well known and it's pretty tried and true. So I think it does speak volumes to our nation's musical history and to the importance of this topic and the power of music as a conversation. So let's explore moments in American music history, African American music history, Black music history, because these things are no longer separable. You cannot split them up, right? Let's explore these moments where music has been used as a tool for unifying, and even in some cases, as a tool that literally replaces or kind of bumps up a level of communication. All right. So in order to kind of explain or understand, make sure we all understand where we are historically, I need to just cover a few bases. So we'll run through some stuff that hopefully a lot of you already know. If you don't know, there's a lot of resources out there you should totally check out and dig into this history. So it's good stuff and it's super relevant right now, right? Cool. Let's take ourselves back to about the year 1600, just a few years ago. Let's talk about what is going on and why we're putting ourselves in American history such a long time ago. All right, well, in 1619, we see the introduction of Black slaves into the colonies, right? 1619, we have a handful of Black slaves that are brought to Virginia. And it is an interesting kind of realization that it's 2020, and in 1619, we start the kind of the beginnings of this kind of musical tradition. It's a long time ago. Just want to put that in perspective for you a little bit. If you remember some of your history lessons correctly, dig around in your brain for that middle school U.S. history life, then you remember that there's a trade route along which spices and all kinds of dyes and all kinds of teas and all kinds of people and all kinds of things are being exchanged, traded, and sold, right? And that along that trade route, which is a triangle, if you remember correctly, there are multiple stops that actually will define where these goods or people are being dropped off for sale or trade. All right, so this is kind of an important piece of all of this. I want to talk for just a second about music and its relevance culturally. Now, I'm about to make a few generalizations, and I want you to know that they're generalizations. And in order to keep us from sitting here for 2 hours and talking about all the nitty-gritty details about all of the infinite pieces of what actually makes up these cultures, I'm going to use these generalizations to kind of get us through and out the other side of this, right? So, I want you to understand that I know that not all white culture experiences the same kinds of things that I'm about to talk about. And I really want you to understand that I know that not all African cultures or groups of people have the same traditions and share the same cultures as well, right? That there's differentiation between these things. We're going to speak generally about these two groups of people in the 1600 to 1800 kind of range of what music is for and kind of the core of their culture, the cultural relevance for music. So, Western European culture at this time, particularly around the 1600s or into the 1700s, where we're seeing a lot of people moving into the New World or into the Americas, really are using music in really specific ways, right? We see music in religious service, we see music in worship, we see music as a really special occasion for celebration, a time where you would actually go to be entertained. Perhaps you would see it at the end of the day to sort of wind down or something like that. But we're definitely seeing it being used as sort of separate little pieces of the day or pieces of life or the week that really don't infiltrate other parts of the entire lifestyle or the entire day. So in juxtaposition, we want to talk about African culture at this time, particularly because these people that were being brought to the Americas from Africa would have had a very, very different experience with music. Generally speaking, African culture ties music into everything. Music starts when you wake up, right? It ends when you go to bed, maybe. So we have this inclusion of music into everyday activities such as work, play, worship, socializing. It's for everyone. This is also different from Western European culture. A lot of art song that comes out of these eras for Western European culture are not really made for the masses, right? These are things that are oftentimes being commissioned by dukes and by kings and courts and things like that. And that's not the same experience that we're seeing in African culture. That music is for the young and the old, the rich, the poor. It's really hard, I guess what I'm saying, to distinguish music from kind of everyday life in African culture because you can't separate them. The fiber of the culture is so tightly woven with music in it that you really can't separate them without disrupting the entire thing, right? Western European culture, it doesn't tend to be that way. And I mean, we even see some exclusion in music, that art song is really not as accessible to poor whites or to people who aren't of a certain class. They have a really different way of including music in their lives than these slaves that they're now having on their property or working for them or in their land. Okay, so now we've established that, and you kind of have a picture of what that's like. What is interesting to note about this is that the traditions that are being brought with people, Black people, to the new colonies and into the Caribbean, I mean, obviously they don't go away when these people arrive in a new land, right? Those are culture and music and art and food. These are things that we hold close to our heart culturally, right? Doesn't matter what culture you're from. This is the core of your being. These are the things that mean the most to you. These are the things that represent you the most, right? So these things don't go away when these Black people are brought into new foreign lands where they don't speak the language and don't really know where they are, or they may not even know anyone that they're with. So we see that this is a tradition that is brought with them, not left behind, and that it becomes the basis of new music and music that we know today, right? The tradition that they bring with them, combined with European musical traditions that are imposed upon them, depending on where they live in the colonies or the Caribbean islands, become the foundation of music like the blues, jazz, funk, hip hop, R&B, neo soul, rap, all the things that we love today. And that is so crazy and so amazing and so mind-blowing, so powerful. So I want to take just a little bit of time here, and I want to actually dig in to one of the earliest examples that we as Americans have on our home turf of a time when music was used as a conversation quite literally. All right, we know that the slave trade left Black slaves in multiple locations in the triangle, right? So we have slaves that are dropped and deposited in the Caribbean islands all the way through the South and then up the coast in the 13 colonies. And even kind of past that as things progress. What's interesting about this for me personally is I think it's so incredible to stop and listen to the music that has developed in these different regions and think about how it's been changed or affected and how much culture has been blended to create something new musically. And we're going to get to the core of this for a second, talking about a really specific example of music in our history that is really distinctly changed because of location and religion and economics and sort of what's going on politically in what later becomes the US. All right, so let's talk about field hollers. Let's talk about field hollers, cornfield hollers, and work songs. Cotton field hollers, they're all kind of grouped into one big category. So quite obviously, as I mentioned before, depending on where you as a slave would have been dropped or sold or traded, it's really going to make a difference how your culture develops and how you are able to even incorporate the things that you love, something like music, since that's the example we're dealing with. How would you be able to incorporate music into your life? Well, if you're dropped in the Caribbean, you might find that you have a lot of freedoms in that way in some places. And in other places like Virginia, for example, probably not as many freedoms for you. In fact, we definitely know there were certain places in the US or in the colonies that as a slave, you were actually not allowed to communicate with either people outside of your farm, or you had really strict rules about when you were able to communicate with each other. So we actually know that on several plantations, in several farms, on several different levels, slaves were not actually allowed to communicate with each other when they were working in the field. So this poses sort of a little bit of an issue, because people always want to communicate. You want to talk with people. You want to have conversation. Also, I think above and beyond that, these people are looking for each other. They're looking for their community. They're looking for ways to connect to each other. They need each other because the amount of injustice, the amount of terrible treatment, the amount of sort of distress is epic, right? It's like to this point that we can't even really fathom what that is like on a lot of levels. And these people not being able to verbally like just have a conversation in language, using a language that they speak in common is quite taxing. So interestingly enough, we find that in a lot of cultures, or in a lot of places in the country, excuse me, where these slaves are not allowed to speak to one another, they are allowed the freedom of singing while working. Now, if I'm a white slave owner, I guess this makes sense, because I know that if they're singing and they're keeping a pace, then production stays high. And I'm all about productivity, right? I want to make sure that they're getting work done. So I'm okay with that, as long as they're not actually using words, because heaven forbid we actually have a moment in time where people start to communicate with each other, and the next thing I know, there's a revolt, right? This is like a level of communication that we're not even willing to approach. So we have this sort of strange environment where they're like, yeah, y'all can sing, but don't use words. And so naturally, what happens is these slaves come up with a system of communicating using music. And instead of using words or language that's already spoken in the region where they live, they start using guttural sounds. They start using a series of kind of whoops and hollers, or escalations in pitch and falling of pitch. These are called slurs. They basically find ways to sing certain patterns of music that actually they all learn, and it becomes a piece of language, something that they can use to communicate between each other. It's amazing. It's phenomenal. It's brilliant, because it doesn't sound like language to the slave owners. They don't get in trouble, and yet they still have opportunity to communicate with each other, right? So we see in recordings of people who learn these hollers because they're passed down from generation to generation. Let's talk about that. Generation to generation, in order for these to have been recorded, like in the 1930s and 40s, we're talking about from the 1600s passed down until this time, so that we could actually get recordings of them. That alone is incredible. But we have this incredible sort of, oops, hold on one second. Sorry about that. So what we see is we have this incredible new system of communication that allows us to communicate with each other while we're in the field, or when we're not allowed to speak to each other. But it also extends out beyond that. So not only can I communicate with people in my immediate vicinity, these calls become really distinct, so I can communicate with other groups in other parts of the field. But we can also communicate with other people on other farms, right? And in this way, we can check on our neighbors. We can check on people down the road. We can actually start to have this system of communication that works and establishes a community. Because that's what we really need, right? We need to be able to look around and say, where are my people? Where is my community? How do I know I'm not alone in this? I need to find you. There's a really interesting and cool other piece of this that comes into play musically in this time frame. And it's so crazy, incredibly powerful that we still use it today in multiple kinds of music. Talking about call and response. So call and response during field hollers is literally a way where one person puts out the call and they say, hey, I'm here. Are you here? And then the group responds, yeah, I'm here. I hear you. I see you. I'm here with you. We're here. We're doing this. We know your pain. We feel you. Right? And they can literally have a conversation back and forth, calling out and responding to one another. It's amazing. It's actually a really, really important part of the blues. It's an even bigger chunk of the jazz idiom and why jazz works the way that it does. We'll talk about that later in the series of lectures here. But it is really, really incredible and amazing. So I've compiled a little list of songs on a Spotify playlist that will give you the link to that can give you some examples of these kinds of things. Really, really encourage you to listen to some of these field hollers and these work songs and really explore the depth of communication and of emotion that they have without utilizing a lot of like verbal kinds of language that you understand. And I also want to point out that as you're going through that list, there's a really cool album that I pulled 3 or 4 tracks from that let you see quite literally that we can see field hollers and different kinds of hollers for different things, right? There's a holler for calling your father home. We're calling out to him and seeing where he is. There's a cry for calling the children in. There's a cry for complaining. There are all of these amazing little clips and sound bites that we have of history that are not just like kind of random pieces of art. They are literally a moment captured in time, a little tiny piece of conversation that is captured and recorded for us to hear. And having this information, being armed with this education, we understand the depth of that, but we also understand that moment in history. And the reason that this was even a thing that needed to exist is sad and terribly depressing, but also so amazing because people find ways to overcome adversity. And music right now is at the core of that. And I love that, and I think it's amazing. I can't wait to talk more about this with you. Please check out the links to music. There's an amazing collection of work songs and field hollers on the Library of Congress website and the list that I've compiled for you from Spotify. And I'll see you in a week.